Hello dear students, a very warm welcome to another live session for AIATS Plus Phase 2, and in this particular session we are discussing the paper mock test 7 which was held on 2nd of March. So as we all are aware of the rituals now, that I will be taking the topics which are biomolecules, excretory product and their elimination, locomotion and movement, human health and disease, and evolution. So let us begin the discussion without wasting much time. So the first question that we have today in our bucket is question number 137, and it states all of the following are properties of malignant tumor cells except. So dear students, from this I can make out that here we need to revise the topic of cancer to deal with this question. So let us quickly revise the concept of cancer. So as we all know that cancer is one of the non-infectious diseases which is the most dreaded disease, because all over the world cancer has killed many people only because in cancer we see abnormal growth, and regulation of that abnormal growth is very difficult to manage. All right. So that abnormal growth is called tumors. So basically in cancer, tumor formation occurs which is beyond the normal condition. So we need to wonder that from where this condition is arising that formation of tumors occur. So there are various factors which play a role in the formation of tumors, and we can see this in the diagram here, that we have a normal cell, and in the normal cell we can see that here you can see the nucleus, and then we have cells which are intact in shape, whereas in this picture you can see the cancer cells, and you can see that the cancer cells have very different types of shapes, or they are morphologically different from the normal cells. So how does this condition arise? That is what we need to recall. So basically what happens is that in normal cells there are certain factors which operate to keep the cell growth in normal condition. So we have the normal cells, and we will talk about the cancerous cells. So basically we know that cell growth takes place in our body by following a particular pattern of cell divisions. So when the cells are dividing normally, then cells attain a fixed size and then they stop growing, and there are various checkpoints in the cell cycle where this division is regulated. So we have various checkpoints in the normal cell cycle where the growth of normal cells are regulated, whereas when we compare a cancerous cells, what happens is that this checkpoints, the growth in the cell cycles are not regulated at these checkpoints. And how does this happen? It happens because of conditions like mutations. So for instance, if mutation has occurred in a cell, then what it will do, it will bypass these checkpoints and growth will not stop in that particular cell, and it will lead to increase in size. Now, where does these mutations come from? So, there can be various factors which are responsible for induction of mutations in the cells. These can be the physical factors like the ionizing radiations, the UV rays. As we know that UV rays lead to skin cancer. It has been also asked in the PYQ once that UV rays can lead to the cancer of which part, and the answer was that UV rays can lead to skin cancer. Further, there are other chemical factors that we name it as chemical carcinogens that are present in tobacco, or people who smoke are very susceptible to chemical carcinogens and cancers like the mouth cancer. That is why it is always said that smoking is injurious to health. Then there are other biological factors as well. For instance, there are viruses which carry genes which can induce mutation and lead to the formation of tumors. Alright. So, this was the first point. Now, there are other conditions which can lead to abnormal growth in a normal cell, and that is known as the proto-oncogenes. So, proto-oncogenes are group of cells which are present in the normal cells, and these proto-oncogenes regulate cell growth. They have their own role as to how they will regulate the cell division so that the normal cells are dividing normally. So, what happens due to mutations, these proto-oncogenes will get converted into oncogenes, and because of these oncogenes, there will be disruption in the cell cycle and its regulation that will lead to the formation of tumor. So, tumor is, in a layman's language, we can just say that tumors are mass of cells which are dividing rapidly. There is rapid mitotic division and it increases in size. Alright. Now, in the picture, you can see two diagrams, and there is a terminology which you can see, which is the contact inhibition. So, in normal cells, so basically normal cells exhibit a property which is known as the contact inhibition. So, what happens is as you can see in this diagram, we have normal cells placed. So, what happens is when these cells will get in contact with each other, there will be inhibition in their growth. They will not overlap each other and grow further. So, you can see these are normal cells which are showing contact inhibition. We can see there is it is also stated that they form a monolayer of cells, meaning they will not grow after a certain level due to contact inhibition. Whereas, if we see a cancerous cell, we can see a mass of cells which are grouped over each other, and there is no distinct boundary that we can make out between the cells. So, what happens is, due to mutations, there is lack of contact inhibition in cancer cells, and therefore, they show vigorous increase in size by dividing continuously. So, this is one of the major points, and it is also mentioned in the NCERT that tumor cells show lack in contact inhibition. All right. Again, there are few important points with respect to the cancer cells. Also, you can see in the given image. So, there are a few other important points, like one of them is that the cancer cells starve the nearby cells. They will starve the nearby cell and compete for nutrients. They will starve the nearby normal cells for nutrients. So it is very obvious that since these these cancerous cells are showing vigorous or rapid cell division, they need more nutrient, more energy, and therefore they starve the nearby cells and lead to their death eventually. So in the picture you can see that we have a normal cell which is aligned in a proper line. Then we have a precancerous cell, this cell in which probably the proto-oncogene got converted into an oncogene, and now it has lost that property of contact inhibition and it has started spreading all over the area. So we can see how cancerous cells divide in this manner. Now tumor formed can be of two different types. So these tumors can be of two different types. One is known as the malignant tumor and the other one is known as the benign tumor. So let us quickly see the differences between the malignant and the benign tumor. So first of all, both these malignant and benign tumors will have disrupted cell cycle because of course they are growing in size, which means that the cell cycle is not operating normally in those cells. But one of the remarkable differences between these two types of tumors is that malignant tumor, as the name suggests, malignant means evil. So we consider this tumor as evil because it has the tendency that it will spread in our body by the virtue of metastasis. So basically what happens in malignant tumors is that they exhibit metastasis, which means that the cells from these tumors will break off and migrate to other parts of the body via the blood, and it will lodge at different sites and start forming a tumor there. That is why we call it as malignant, and that is why we also call it that it is invasive in nature, because it is invading different areas and spreading all around our body. Whereas benign tumors are considered less dangerous only because they do not exhibit metastasis. They do not show metastasis, and thus they do not spread to different parts of the body. That is why we also say that benign tumors can be easily removed if detected, because they are just lodged at a site. We say that they are lodged at a site, and that is why we also call it as non-invasive. For better understanding, we can see a diagram of a benign tumor and a malignant tumor, and you can see that both the cells in the benign as well as in the malignant tumor have abnormal growth, but the benign tumor has a defined boundary. It has a defined boundary, and it is not breaking this boundary, and the cells are not moving out of it. All right, the cell is intact although it has grown large in size. But if we see the malignant tumor, we can see that the boundary is not intact and the cells are moving out, and these particular cells will then migrate to different body parts and lodge there and form a new tumor there. All right. So this is one of the basic differences between the two. And of course, both these are tumor cells, so both of them will starve their neighboring cells. Both will starve their neighboring cells. Also, both of them are said to show neoplasmic transformation. So basically the word neo means new. Neo means new. So what happens is, it is said that the mutations lead to alternation in the genetic material of the normal cell, and therefore both of these types of tumor show neoplasmic transformation. Alright, so this was the basic about the concept of cancer and the different types of tumors. Now let us go back to our question to find out our right answer. So basically we need to choose the incorrect feature with respect to malignant tumors. So the first option that we have, it states tumor cells grow very rapidly, which is true, as already discussed, invade and damage the surrounding tissue. So as already discussed, these are true with respect to malignant tumors and therefore cannot be the right answer. Moving to option 2, which states compete with the normal cells for vital nutrients. So as already mentioned, that since they show rapid cell division, they compete with the neighboring cells for nutrients, therefore option 2 also gets eliminated. Finally, we have the third option, which states they show property of metastasis. So as we have discussed it deeply, that option third also will not hold true. Then finally we have the fourth option, which states they show property of contact inhibition. So as we saw that this is a property of a normal cell, and therefore the answer that we are looking for will be option 4. So I hope this was clear to you, and we get many questions from the topic of cancer. So it is important that we revise it thoroughly before our NEET exam. Alright, I can see the students giving answer as option 3rd, but it is incorrect. The answer would be option 4th. Alright, so the next question that we have is question 138, and it pertains to the chapter of excretion, as I can see. So the given statements read, the first statement that we have is a decrease in blood flow to the atria of the heart can cause the release of ANF. Statement 2 states ANF can cause vasodilation and thereby decreases the blood pressure. Alright, so let us quickly revise the concept here from which this question has been framed, and we have already discussed the concept of RAS mechanism in great detail in our different classes. So we'll just quickly revise it. So basically what happens is, whenever there is disturbance in the osmolarity of our body fluid, or there is decrease in the glomerulus flow rate, or there is decrease in blood pressure, the JG cells in our body gets activated to release, the JG cells of the juxtaglomerular apparatus gets activated to release renin, and then renin further converts angiotensinogen present in our blood here. JG cells will be associated with the kidneys. Angiotensinogen, which is already present in our blood, will get converted in the presence of renin into angiotensin 1, and then angiotensin 1 further gets converted into angiotensin 2 in the presence of the enzyme ACE which is known as the angiotensinogen converting enzyme, and it is produced in our lungs. Now the angiotensinogen 2 formed is a very powerful vasoconstrictor. So basically we can make out that since this angiotensin 2 is acting as a vasoconstrictor, it will help to increase the blood pressure. We can take the example here of, for instance, if you are watering your garden with a pipe, and just in case if you press the endings of the pipe through which you are watering the garden, put some pressure on it, the flow of water in that particular pipe will increase. So this is exactly what happens when we are talking about vasoconstriction. Angiotensin 2 will constrict our blood vessels and increase the blood flow rate. And this is one of the ways how our body tries to restore the blood pressure which has decreased decreased below the normal levels. Alright. Further, this angiotensin 2 will activate the adrenal cortex to release an enzyme which is known as the aldosterone. Dear students, please let me know in the comment section that what is the chemical nature of aldosterone. So aldosterone basically acts on the renal distal tubules and stimulates the absorption of sodium and water, and it stimulates simultaneously it will stimulate the excretion of potassium from our body. So overall what happens is our body is able to retain more volume of water, and this will lead to increase in the GFR, increase in the blood pressure. But too much of anything is never good. So when this RAS mechanism has regulated the blood pressure, it should not go beyond the normal level. So this is where ANF comes into picture. I am waiting for the answers. What is the chemical nature of aldosterone? So ANF is a hormone which is released from the walls of heart, and particularly the atrial wall, and it is a very powerful vasodilator. So basically we again go back to our concept where we try to imagine that we are putting pressure on the neck of a pipe. Just imagine that you have released the pipe again. So obviously the flow of blood in that, the flow of water from that particular pipe will become at normal rate. So this is how vasodilation works. This will cause vasodilations in the blood vessels, and it will restore the blood pressure to the normal level, or it will decrease the blood pressure. So the chemical nature of aldosterone is that it is a steroid and it is a mineralocorticoid, whereas ANF is a peptide hormone. So now let us go back to our question to find out the right answer. So our statement 1 states a decrease in blood flow to the atria of the heart can cause the release of ANF. So since we know that ANF is responsible for decreasing the blood pressure and it acts antagonistic to RAS and keeps a check on RAS. So basically the release of ANF will take place when there is increase in blood flow, not decrease in blood flow, and therefore statement 1 is incorrect. Then we have the statement 2 which states ANF can cause vasodilation, which is true, and thereby decreases the blood pressure, which is also true. So we can make out that our statement 1 is incorrect but statement 2 is correct. And in the options given, we can see our third option states the same. Therefore, the right answer will be option third. So, this is again a very important concept from the chapter of excretion, and it should be revised thoroughly for the NEET exam. Alright, I can see someone has answered that it is a steroidal hormone, which is absolutely right. Okay, so we move on to our next question, which is question 142, and it states, if a person is bitten by a snake, then he should be immediately administered with. So, dear students, we know that here we need to figure out that what kind of immunity should be given to this poor person who has been bitten by a snake, so that we can combat this situation. So, we will quickly revise the concept of immunity here, which we have already discussed in our previous classes in great detail. So, basically immunity is the ability of our body to fight with infectious agents, and it protects our body from the invading pathogens. Now, immunity can be categorized into two types, which is the active immunity and the passive immunity. So, active immunity is considered to be comparatively slower than the passive immunity, whereas passive immunity is rapid. It means that if we are providing passive immunity to any person, then there will be immediate reaction and the results will be seen immediately. Then we have the active immunity. Again, if we talk about, they are long-lived, whereas the passive immunity is short-lived. For instance, you can recall that whenever we used to get a cut, then we have often taken the injection of tetanus. So, that tetanus injection has a short-term effect, like after a certain period, we again need to get that tetanus injection if there is any mishappening. Whereas, if you recall that our mothers used to tell that once you have suffered from chickenpox, there is a probability that you will not suffer from that again. So, there it happens because their active immunity is operating. So, how does this active immunity is developed? So, this active immunity developed when there is a natural infection or there is exposure to the antigenic polypeptide, alright. Whereas, and the body is making its own antibody. Whereas, in passive immunity, the body does not make the antibodies on its own, and therefore it lacks that particular memory. We know that our immune system is characterized by memory. So, since our body has made the antibody on its own, it will remember it for a longer time. That is why we say that active immunity is long-lived. Now, active immunity and both passive immunity can be categorized further as natural active immunity and passive and artificial active immunity, and passive immunity also can be categorized in the same manner as natural passive immunity and artificial passive immunity. So, the example of natural active immunity is natural infections that occurs in our body that will lead to the formation of antibodies. So, natural active immunity is developed by natural infections, whereas artificial active immunity is, or we also have vaccines. artificial active immunity is given via vaccines, where the killed pathogens or the virulent portion of the pathogen has been disrupted so that the body does not get affected severely, and then vaccines are administered to provide artificial active immunity to the body, where the antigenic polypeptides are administered. That was how we were given, or we were provided with COVID vaccines, so that we can combat the pandemic. All right. Coming to the natural passive immunity, then we have two very famous examples, which is the IgA and the IgG, where we know the IgA is present in the mother's milk, which is also known as the colostrum, and IgG is transferred from the mother via placenta to the fetus, that provides immunity. And the example of artificial passive immunity is the anti-tetanus serum or the anti-venom that is given in the case of tetanus or in the case of snake bite, because as we already discussed that it is rapid in nature. So we need our body to immediately combat the situation, to immediately develop that immunity, and that is why antibodies or the injections containing those antibodies are directly administered to the patient. So basically these the source of these artificial passive immunity is that it already contains the preformed antibodies. Just like in the natural passive immunity, we had a source of antibodies. So we go back to our question now. So we need an immediate effect, as you can see it is stated in the question as well. So we need a preformed antibody, and in the options given we can see our third option states antivenom, and antivenom will have preformed antibodies, and therefore the answer that we are looking for here is antivenom. Whereas vaccine and antigenic polypeptide will provide with active immunity, which is not required in the given condition. All right. So this was all about the concept of immunity. Now we go back to our next question. We move ahead to our next question, and it is question 146. I can see people have answered, students have answered antivenom, and you are absolutely right. So the next question that we have is a diagram based question, and it pertains to the chapter biomolecule. I can make out that from the figure given, and you can see that we have enzymes and substrates and product. All right. So the question states, choose the correct inference with respect to a certain biochemical reaction represented in the below given graph. So we have the graph here. So from the graph we can make out that here we are talking in terms of potential energy and substrate and products potential energy. So let us quickly discuss the concept of enzyme reaction and the role of enzymes. So basically enzymes are biocatalyst. Are all enzymes protein in nature? Please let me know in the comment section. I would like to know the answer. That are all enzymes protein in nature? Yes or no? So basically enzymes are biocatalyst that increase the rate of reaction. Now how do they increase the rate of reaction? That we will discuss. And here on the screen you can see a diagram where we have the same labelings as the one that were there in the question, that we have the potential energy, we have the substrate and the product. But there is a slight difference in the figure which is given in the question and the figure which is taken from the NCERT. So we'll understand what is that particular difference. So basically, let us first recall a few concepts related to enzyme, its mechanism of action. So we see that here we have a term which is known as the activation energy. So basically, for any reaction to occur, it needs a certain level of energy, and that energy is known as the activation energy. And the difference between the energy level of the substrate with that of the transition state is known as the activation energy. So here we can see that even in the diagram there are two labelings, and they are showing that there is activation energy without the enzyme, and we can see that we have a large value for that, whereas the activation energy with the enzyme has comparatively a lower value. So here we have activation energy with the enzyme and we have comparatively a lower value. So this is how enzymes play an important role and accelerate the rate of reaction, as they lower the activation energy required for the given reaction. So enzymes lower the activation energy, which is the energy difference between the substrate and the transition state, and accelerate the rate of reaction. Now what does this transition state mean here? So basically, the conversion of substrate to the product is done by a chain of reactions where different intermediate structures are formed. We also call it as different altered structures. So these intermediate structures are transient in nature because they are temporary. These intermediate structures are only a means by which the product is formed, all right? And they are very unstable because they have high energy. Here the transition state that we see is said to have, this transition state has high energy, it has high energy and high energy and low stability. We know that from the concept of chemistry that it is the normal tendency of a molecule to lose the energy and come back at lower energy status to become active. And here the energy we are talking about is in the terms of potential energy. All right. Now based on this, that whether the substrate has more potential energy or the product has more potential energy, we have two different types of reactions. I can see someone has commented that some of them are and some of them are not. So it is absolutely true, as we say that most of the enzymes are proteins, and we do not say that all enzymes are proteins, because we have an enzyme which is known as the ribozyme, which is a nucleic acid, and it acts as the enzyme. All right. So based on the level of energy, we have two different types of reactions, and they are known as the endothermic reactions and the exothermic reaction. We can see that there is a difference from its name itself, as endo and exo has its own meaning. In endothermic reaction, heat is supplied so that reaction will proceed in the forward direction or towards the formation of product. All right. So heat is supplied, and in this condition the product that is formed has higher potential energy as compared to the substrate. So if we plot a graph for substrate and product in terms of potential energy, our substrate will be at a lower level as compared to the potential, as compared to the product. It will be somewhat like this, all right? Whereas if we talk about exothermic reactions, then these reactions involve release of energy. So there is release of energy, and that is why we sometimes also call that exothermic reactions are spontaneous, which means that they occur on their own. And in this condition, if you plot the graph, then in terms of potential energy, then the substrate will be at a higher level as compared to our product. All right. So this is the basic about the different types of reactions, and we will quickly recall how enzymes show their mechanism. So basically what happens is that we have our enzyme, and the enzyme has its own active site, which is divided into the binding site and the catalytic site, and we have the substrate. So the substrate will bind to the active site, and it will lead to the formation of, when the substrate binds to the active site, there are some conformational changes that takes place, and the substrate fits itself properly in the site of the active site, and after that we have an enzyme substrate complex formed, and it is mandatory that the enzyme substrate complex should be formed. So it is mandatory that enzyme substrate complex will be formed, and it is again, as explained already, that it is a transient phenomenon, because this structure will further disintegrate, because finally we need a product. So this is just an intermediate structure which is formed in the course of catalysis. So further, when enzyme substrate complex is formed, there are certain changes in terms of breakage and formation of new bonds, and this enzyme substrate complex will now form the enzyme product complex. And after the enzyme product complex is formed, there will be further changes in the structure of the product, and the product will get released, and the enzyme will also be released and free to use again. That is why we also say that enzymes can be recycled and reused after the formation of the product. So this was the basic about the enzyme activity. Now let us go back to our question. And we can see our graph. Let us try to read the graph again. So we can see that we have the graph where we are showing the potential energy on one side, and then we have the progression of reaction, and we have the substrate at a lower level as compared to the product. So as we have already discussed, this will help me make out that here we are talking about an endothermic reaction. So let us read the options one by one to find out the correct inference, keeping in mind that we are talking about endothermic reaction. All right. So the first option is heat is released in the surrounding in this reaction. So as already discussed, that heat will be released in exothermic reaction. Here heat is supplied instead for the progression of the reaction. Therefore, option 1 cannot be the right answer. A represents energy released by substrate. This is again incorrect, as already discussed, that here we have the transition state, and the difference between the substrate, the difference between the energy level of the substrate and the transition state is known as the activation energy. So here it is the activation energy and not the energy of the substrate. B represents activation energy of the reaction. So again here we cannot say that B represents the activation energy, as already discussed. Therefore, option 3rd will also get eliminated. And then finally we have the last option, which states it is an endothermic reaction, which is absolutely true. And further it is stating as the energy content of the product is higher than the substrate, which we have already discussed that exist. And therefore, the answer that we are looking for is option 4th. So this was important, as many questions are asked from the portion of enzyme. So let us now quickly go back to our next question, and again we have a question pertaining to the concept of enzyme, but since we have discussed it already, let us read the question to find out the answer. So our first option states all of the following are steps involved in the catalytic cycle of an enzyme action except. So the first option states substrate binds to the active site of enzyme. As we already saw that the substrate will bind to the active site of the enzyme. So therefore option 1 is correct, as we need to choose the incorrect one with respect to the mechanism of enzyme action. So option 1 cannot be the right answer. Moving to option 2, it states the binding of substrate induces the enzyme to alter its shape, fitting more tightly around the substrate. So this happens so that enzyme substrate complex is formed, as already explained, and formation of enzyme substrate complex is an important step, and therefore option 2 is also correct and cannot be the right answer. Then we say that we have the third option, which states enzyme substrate complex is not formed in enzymatic reaction. This is an incorrect statement, as we have already discussed that the formation of enzyme substrate complex is a mandatory step, and therefore the answer that we are looking for is option 3rd. But let us see the last option as well, which states the enzyme releases the product and free enzyme. As we already saw in the picture that at the end we have the product and the free enzyme, which can be further used, and therefore a fourth option is also correct. Thus a right answer will be option 3rd. Now we move to our next question, which is question 157, and I can see students have answered option 4th also, option 3rd also, but option 3rd is the right answer. So the question states select the incorrect match with respect to part of human skeleton and the number of bones they contains. So let us quickly revise the human skeletal system so that we can answer our question in terms of the different parts and the number of bones associated with it. So basically our endoskeleton is divided into two principal axes, and they are the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Here in the figure we can see that we have a diagram of the axial skeleton, and the portion highlighted with the grey part represents the axial skeleton. So we have the ribs here. We can see that all of them fall in a given axis, all right. So our axial skeleton are composed of the skull, then we have the hyoid bone, then we have the auditory ossicles, the vertebral column, the thorax further, and our skull constitutes the cranial and the facial bones, and our cranial bones are made up of 8 bones and the facial bone is made up of 14 bones. Quickly give me an example of a paired facial bones in the comment section. Then we have the hyoid bone. So hyoid bone is present at the base of the buccal cavity. And there is an important update from the NCERT that earlier the old NCERT stated that hyoid is present at the base of the buccal cavity and it is a part of the skull bone. But now they have updated this concept and now we do not include the hyoid bone as a part of our skull bone. So this is the latest update that they have made and I hope you are aware about it. Even in the picture you can see that skull bone has been categorized only with cranium and the facial bone. Hyoid bone has been stated independently, all right. Then we have the auditory ossicles, which are the ear ossicles, malleus and cusps, and we have 3 pairs of them, that is we have 6 number. Then we have the vertebral column, which are made up of 26 vertebrae. And then we have this thorax, which is made up of sternum and the ribs. And in total, if you see, we have 80 bones. So in total, we have 80 bones which constitute the axial skeleton. I can see students have answered zygomatic and maxilla, and you are absolutely right that these are the paired bones. All right. Now we will quickly see the appendicular skeleton, and here you can see that the limbs and the girdles, constitute the appendicular skeleton, all right. So we have the pectoral or the shoulder girdles, which are made of the clavicle, which is also known as the scapula, and there are 2 bones. So in total we say that there are 4 girdle bones. Then we have the upper limbs, which are hands, and they are made up of 6 types of bones, and then their respective numbers has been stated. Then we have the pelvic or the hip girdle, which is made up of coxal bone. So coxal bone in itself is made up of by the fusion of 3 different bones, which is known as the ischium, pubis and ilium. But we say that the hip or the pelvic or the coxal bone is 2 in number. Students often get confused in this portion. So we need to remember it that coxal bone in itself is made by the fusion of 3 bones. Sorry. But our pelvic girdle is made up of 2 bones. Then we have the lower limbs, which are made up of again 7 types of bones, and the total number of the appendicular skeleton has 206 bones. So this chart has been given to you so that you have the numbering and the different types of bones at one place. Otherwise, it is quite difficult to keep in mind that how many bones are associated with which part. So I hope this will help you memorize it properly. So now we go back to our question to find out our right answer. And the first option states ear ossicle, and we already saw that we have 3 pairs of ear ossicles. Therefore, option 1 cannot be the right answer. Hyoid bone is 1 in number, we already discussed, therefore option 2 is also incorrect. Moving to option 3, exoskeleton has been marked with 80 bones, and we already saw that there are 80 bones that constitute the axial skeleton, whereas there were 206 bones which made the axial skeleton of the adults, and therefore option 3 will also be incorrect and cannot be the answer. Then finally, we have the last option which states cranium, and we know that it is incorrect as cranium is made up of 8 bones, whereas our face is made up of 14 bones. So here the answer that we are looking for is option 4. So dear students, this marks the end of the discussion, and all the best for the upcoming NEET exam. Hope to see you again. All the best. Bye bye.